So, the simulation argument, are we living in a computer simulation? This is a topic in philosophy that dovetails with a lot of sci-fi and pop culture. A recent example of that you might be familiar with appears in the show Rick and Morty, which involves not only the multiverse, but also the idea that, various realities are simulated realities. So if you haven't seen any of this movie before, or this show, television show before, check out a clip. You can find them pretty easily around YouTube and whatnot.
We did it, Morty. I'm gonna be able to use these processors to make some real important science stuff. Huh. I thought I entered the code right.
Well, what's this? Well, what could this possibly be? Because it looks like you're inside a simulation. Inside a simulation. You're still on the ship. Game day, bucket, go.
So in philosophy, recent discussion of this topic has been kicked off by Nick Bostrom in his essay, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? Oftentimes when I assign this topic, I assign a little video of Bostrom himself explaining the simulation argument. So if you have a chance, you can find that on YouTube, or I've probably posted it somewhere in the on the course page as well. So what I'll do here is just talk through a couple of key elements of Bostrom's main argument here, and then raise a couple of questions about it. So if you again, first thing you ought to do probably is watch Bostrom's own explanation of his argument. And when you're watching that video, be sure and keep in mind how he distinguishes the simulation argument from skeptical arguments. So we've covered already some epistemological skepticism, and those arguments have to do with how we're going to define knowledge, and then whether or not knowledge is possible. And notice how Bostrom distinguishes his argument from those kinds of skeptical arguments. Also pay attention to what he claims is a common misunderstanding of the simulation argument. And that basic misunderstanding is to conflate the simulation argument and the simulation hypothesis, which is only one part of that argument. All right, and so with that in the background here, let's pull out a couple of key ideas from Bostrom's essay, take a look at his main argument. So supercomputers and simulations. So he notes, and as I just noted, many works of science fiction, but also forecasts by serious technologists and futurologists predict that enormous amounts of computing power will be available in the future. Not a crazy or unfounded prediction, right? Just in your own lifetime, you've seen computer programming power increase quite a bit. Let us suppose for a moment that these predictions are correct. One thing that later generations might do with their super powerful computers is run detailed simulations of their forebears or of people like their forebears. Because their computers will be so powerful, they could run a great many such simulations. Suppose that these simulated people are conscious. Then it could be the case that the vast majority of minds like ours do not belong to the original race, but rather to people simulated by the advanced descendants of an original race. So again, he's got a couple of predictions and assumptions built into this basic hypothesis here. Let's take a look at those real quickly. So again, some predictions and assumptions of this argument. So first, as he just mentioned, future generations are going to have exponentially more powerful computing. Again, certainly in the time that I've been messing around with computers, that computing power has increased a whole lot from the original desktop computers that were available when personal desktop computers first came out when I was, a teenager and in college. Next assumption. So again, that first assumption is not it's an assumption, but it's not wild, right? Second, what would future generations do with their computing power? And again, here's the other prediction, that they would be interested in running simulations of their ancestors. Already in biology departments, they run computer models of evolution in various aspects of evolution in order to try to test their hypotheses. So we're already running these kinds, the basic kinds of simulations that game simulations that might be used in more robust ways with more computing power to simulate an entire reality. And then three, this next assumption is a philosophy of mind assumption. We can call it the functionalist philosophy of mind assumption here. It's the idea of substrate independence in the philosophy of mind. And namely, the basic idea there is that a sufficiently complex computer would have conscious experiences just like you and I are having conscious experiences right now. And then all of those together, if 1 through 3 holds, then the vast majority of minds like ours are not conscious beings, but simulated minds in a computer, and again, created by advanced people, right, with much more computing power than we have. And so picking up on that philosophy of mind assumption there, we've likely already covered the philosophy of mind and functionalism. When I cover functionalism, I typically talk about the Henrietta thought experiment from Lycan. And that idea is that, again, a sufficiently complex computer performing the same kinds of computations that go on in our own brains would be a conscious being as well. So he says a common assumption in the philosophy of mind is that of substrate independence. The idea is that mental states can supervene on any of a broad class of physical substrates. Provided a system implements the right sort of computational structures and processes, it can be associated with conscious experiences. So like self-awareness, right? Awareness of external objects, flexibility, responding to contingency, and so forth. It's not an essential property of consciousness that is implemented on a carbon-based biological neural networks inside the cranium. Silicon-based processors inside a computer could, in principle, do the same thing. So arguments for this thesis have been in the literature. He points out here, Bostrom points out, and although it's not entirely uncontroversial, here we shall take it as a given. So again, he's acknowledging the assumption that he's working with here. And then the basic simulation argument. So the simulation argument is a trilemma. It says that one of these 3 propositions is true, then challenges us to either identify a fourth or show that, the simulation hypothesis is not true. So again, the simulation argument posits this trilemma. So, and says that one of these is likely true. A, or 1 here, the human species is very likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage. What he means by a post-human stage is a stage in which human beings have to enhance themselves in order to keep up with the amount of information that's thrown at us. Basically, to keep up with technological change, we have to enhance our own capacities. Right? 2, any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of ancestor simulations of their evolutionary history or variations thereof. Ancestor simulations are just like, simulations of these post-humans forebears. So like us, we would be those forebears, right? Or maybe a later generation of biological beings like ourselves, human beings like ourselves. And then the third proposition is that we're almost certainly living in a simulation. So he says it follows that the belief that there is a significant chance that we would one day become post-humans who run ancestor simulations is false unless we're currently living in a simulation. So he says it's then possible to argue, if this were the case, it would be rational to think that we're likely among the simulated minds rather than among the original biological ones. Therefore, if we don't think that we are currently living in a computer simulation, we are not entitled to believe that we will have descendants who will run lots of simulations of their forebears. So notice that that argument does not directly argue for the conclusion that we live in a computer simulation. The simulation hypothesis, that third, let me go back here, that third, the third proposition in his argument, right? That's the simulation hypothesis. So he's arguing that one of those three is the case, but he doesn't argue which one. And in the video where he discusses this, he talks about, distributing our credence basically evenly across those. So another version of this sort of thing. Lately, in my classes, I've been taken to using this Philosophy Through Pop Culture book. It has a book called Life, an article in it called Life on the Holodeck. It's about Star Trek, and it's by this author Fogel. And Fogel presents a different version of this kind of argument. Fogel discusses Bostrom's argument, but here's how Fogel puts this argument. He calls it the holographic or the holodeck hypothesis. He uses both phrases there. And so, do we live in a computer simulation? There appear to be three possibilities. The holographic hypothesis is impossible. So it's either metaphysically impossible or it's logically impossible, it has a self-contradiction in it somewhere. Or the holographic hypothesis is possible but unlikely. Or we're probably living in a holographic simulation. So he goes on to argue that the holographic hypothesis is not impossible. It doesn't appear to have any self-contradictions in that hypothesis itself. It's also not unlikely. In fact, Fogel points to the idea that many contemporary physicists talk about the universe basically being a kind of simulation and constructed on like a digital computer. So he actually thinks that lends credence to that hypothesis. And then 3, the holographic hypothesis is not unlikely because some contemporary science suggests it, right? That's that last one. And then thus we're almost certainly living in a computer simulation. So again, he puts a slightly different spin on that argument than Bostrom does. And then Fogel discusses some further implications of the simulation thesis, the simulation.
Here, check this out.
Roy, what's wrong?
I had a nightmare. I was with an old man. He put a helmet on me.
It's just a fever. Get some sleep. I don't want you missing school on Monday.
I want you kids to look around you today and think about your future. Now is the time in your life when anything is possible.
Spiraling perfectly, it's going to be caught by Roy Parsons. Roy Parsons is at the 20. Now he's at the 10. Nothing can stop Roy the Rocket. Touchdown!
I just think it's time to get realistic. Have you talked to my father about the carpet store? Roy?
Had we caught it sooner... Well, hindsight is 20/20, Roy. What's important is that we move quickly.
I'm not ready to die.
You're not going to.
Yeah! Hey, thanks for the carpet, Roy.
Hey, Roy, you pull those Persian off-white shags for the clearance sale?
Whoa. Shit! Oh, what the hell? Whoa, where am I?
55 years. Not bad, Morty. You kind of wasted your 30s, though, with that whole bird-watching phase.
Where's my wife?
Morty, you were just playing a game. It's called Roy. Snap out of it. Come on.
I'm Morty. You're Rick.
So a couple of those real quick here. First, if we exist in a computer simulation programmed by other intelligent beings, then do we have free will or is it an illusion? Right? So we may have covered the free will debate in this class already. Sometimes I cover it, sometimes I don't. But, if we're inside a computer and computers operate according to the programs, it looks like the software is basically functioning like the law of universal causation or determinism, and that our choices aren't real choices. We're simply running a program under the delusion that we have free will. So simulation argument seems to challenge the idea that we have free will. Next, if we live in a computer simulation, then what's the moral status of simulated beings? Do we have obligations to them, right? So if they're real, then it seems like we would have, or sentient and rational, then it looks like maybe we have obligations to them, right? But if they're not real, then maybe we don't have obligations to them. But of course, you take yourself to be real as well right now, probably. So if we are in a computer simulation, why not think that the others have subjective experience as well, rather than just, running a program that appears to us to be like a person or a consciousness. And then if we exist in a computer simulation, then doesn't it imply that our existence is meaningless, right? Because it's pre-programmed. Again, we're not making our own purpose or picking something to be our purpose for ourselves or making our own choices, which seems like one of the things that makes them meaningful to us is that we were the authors of them. But if we're living in a computer simulation, it's hard to see how we could be the author of our own actions in any way again. So again, challenging the idea that our lives are purposeful or meaningful in some kind of way. So some discussion questions for you to think about while you're going through this material. Again, how does Bostrom distinguish his simulation argument from other skeptical arguments like the dream argument or evil demon argument or other skeptical arguments that we may have covered earlier in the semester when discussing epistemology? Again, keep in mind the difference between the simulation argument, the trilemma, and the simulation hypothesis, which is just one of those propositions in that trilemma. And then, again, a very kind of more of a subtle point here. Keep in mind, does Bostrom really argue directly for the claim that we exist in a computer simulation? Is that really what that argument is getting at? Many popular conversations of that argument seem to suggest that, but Bostrom does not suggest that. He takes a more subtle stance on that issue, again, about the credence he assigns or credibility he assigns or probability he assigns across those options in the argument. And then a couple of objections to think about. There's another contemporary philosopher named Weatherson. He's got an article called Are You a Sim?, in which he argues that it's self-evident to you that you are not a computer and not a simulation, a simulated mind. So Sims, he's getting that from the video game where people are populating a city that you've constructed. And so this is a way of arguing a criticism of the trilemma, right? So, for example, criticisms of the assumption that simulated minds would have a subjective experience. So if we challenge that, we're kind of challenging that trilemma, or maybe trying to show that one of them is false, or that there's another option, right? And then criticisms of specific propositions in the trilemma. And this is where what's sometimes called the underdetermination objection or an underdetermination objection arises. The evidence that we have that we are in the dream world or in the real world or in the simulated world or in the real world is exactly the same. So if our evidence is the same for both scenarios, then we have an epistemological problem of trying to determine which would be the case. It looks like our evidence is underdetermined. It doesn't point us in the direction of one conclusion over another. It could equally just as be the case. It's just as likely that we're in the simulation as that we're not in the simulation. So again, the underdetermination objection is an epistemological objection to that trilemma. And then, of course, this hinges on the idea of superintelligence. So just a little bit more on that. Ray Kurzweil is a futurologist, and he talks about the singularity, and this is really what Bostrom has in mind by the post-humans, right? So he says, what then is the singularity? It's the future period during which the pace of technological change will be so rapid, its impact so deep, that human life will be irreversibly transformed. Although neither utopian nor dystopian, this epoch will transform the concepts that we rely on to give meaning to our lives, from our business models to the cycle of human life, including death itself. Understanding the singularity will alter our perspective on the significance of our past and the ramifications of our future. To truly understand it, how it inherently changes one's view of life in general and of one's own particular life, right? So I regard someone who understands the singularity and who has reflected upon its implications for his or her own life as a singularitarian, right? We need to then, the singularity then will allow us to transcend the limitations of our biological bodies and brains, and will gain power over our fates. Our mortality will be in our own hands, right? We will be able to live as long as we want. We will fully understand human thinking and will vastly expand its reach. Maybe travel through space longer, right? By the end of this century, the non-biological portion of our intelligence will be trillions of times more powerful than unaided human intelligence. So again, vastly, getting back to that idea of vastly more powerful computing power. So if there was a simulation, right, we've reached this post-human stage, the singularity, right, where we've had to transcend the limits of our own, where we've transcended the limits of our own biological bodies and enhanced ourselves so that we can grapple with all of this information that's being tossed at us and the change that's being tossed at us. If we were in a computer simulation now, it would have to be run by and designed by some superintelligence. So here's Bostrom on superintelligence. By that, we mean an intellect that is much smarter than the best human brains in practically every field, including scientific creativity, general wisdom, and social skills. This definition leaves open how the superintelligence is implemented. It could be a digital computer, an ensemble of networks computer, cultured cortexual tissue, or what have you. It also leaves open whether the superintelligence is conscious and has subjective experiences. Entities such as companies or scientific community are not superintelligences according to this definition, although they can perform a number of tasks which no human individual is capable. They're not intellects, and there are many fields in which they perform much worse than the human brain. For example, you can't have real-time conversations with the scientific community, but you could with a superintelligence that knows everything our scientific community knows. Right? So a little bit more from Bostrom. We know that blind evolutionary processes can produce human-level general intelligence, since they've already done so at least once. Evolutionary processes with foresight, that is, genetic programs designed and guided by an intelligent human programmer, should be able to achieve a similar outcome with far greater efficiency. So then this gives rise, so we get a super intelligence, a super artificial intelligence, right? Strong AI. This does raise what people call the control problem. It's namely, how do we design and implement an AI that benefits humanity rather than decides that, we've got to go, right? So Bostrom says, let an ultra-intelligent machine be defined as a machine that can far surpass all the intellectual activities of any man, any man however clever. Since the design of these machines is one of these intellectual activities, an ultra-intelligent machine could design even better machines. There would then be unquestionably an intelligence explosion, and the intelligence of man would be far left behind. This ultra-intelligent machine would be the last invention that man need ever make, because it's going to do all the inventing from now on, right? Provided that the machine is docile enough, here comes the control problem, to let us, to tell us how to keep it under control, right? So this gives rise to existential risk, right? Risks that threaten the existence of humanity. So when we create the first superintelligent entity, we might make the mistake and give it goals that lead it to annihilate humankind, assuming its enormous intellectual advantages gives it the power to do so. For example, we could mistakenly elevate a sub-goal to the status of a super goal. We tell it to solve the mathematical problem, and the AI complies. by turning all the matter in the solar system into a gigantic calculating device, and in the process killing the person who asked the question, right? So existential risk, let's call it the Ultron problem. So if you've seen the Avengers, Age of Ultron, when they make Ultron, Ultron decides that humanity's got to go, right? So there's the control problem, or the Terminator problem. It's when we AI that we create decides and makes decisions that it can implement that are detrimental to us, even to the point of eliminating humanity. So there's a little bit on the simulation argument and a couple related topics. Be sure and watch the assigned material on Bostrom and any readings that I've assigned for this section. And I will see y'all in the next video.